Welcome to Scuffed Hammer. I'm Scuffed, and today I'll be going over a long-awaited tutorial on magnetizing some crisis suits. Starting off, I have to remove some blue tack that I was using to hastily combine my miniatures together as they were unbuilt, and I'd kind of been putting off this project for a while. Since it's been a while, I thought I'd break out the instructions and let them guide me. First, I'll need to cut out the missing leg bits that I haven't finished yet. Unfortunately for this section, I didn't realize, but my entire working area is going to be out of focus. So you won't be able to see that just yet, but a little bit later on, trust me, it improves. For magnetizing the large pieces together, being the body and the legs, I'll be using a 5mm by 3mm magnet. And for magnetizing all of the small pieces, I'll be using a 2mm by 2mm magnet. Before moving on, I thought I'd give the models just a little bit of extra acetone to the feet to make sure they were securely fitted down. Unfortunately, my camera stopped recording, so I don't have any footage of me drilling the pilot holes, but as you can see, I've drilled a couple small holes in the bases and underside of the torsos, and the purpose of this is just to provide my larger drill bit with a sort of guide. Because the last thing you want is to go straight in there with a 5mm drill bit and wildly veer off course. Now, normally I do most of my drilling by hand, but for anything larger than 3mm, I found that my pin vise sadly won't fit the drill bit. So instead I use a power drill. Now, a couple things to be aware of when using a power drill on minis is that you, one, don't want to over drill, as you could very easily go straight through the other side. And two, this might be a little bit subjective, but I found that working with higher speeds tends to be a little bit easier, as plastic is quite easy to cut through. If I go at lower speeds, the bit will kind of dig very aggressively into the model. And I don't want this, I want a little bit finer control. So instead, by using a higher RPM, I'm able to shave it off rather than digging into the plastic, if that makes sense. So you'll notice lots of fine powdery shavings rather than long, thick strands. But this is just a personal preference of mine, so your mileage may vary. While you might think that a 5mm by 3 is a little bit of overkill for just magnetizing the torsos together, this is what I have on hand, and I like the extra security it gives, and I like the satisfying ka-thunk it makes when you put two of the 5mm magnets together. I've supplied all my magnets from AliExpress, as I find they tend to be the cheapest for bulk magnets. However, you can also get them from Amazon, eBay. Hammer even buys his magnets from Bunnings, so there's many options there. I find that in handling and placing magnets, it's much easier to stick them onto a ferrous metal. Here I'm using a drill bit that isn't in use right now. And I've just stuck a magnet right to the end of it so that I can apply some glue and stick it right in. In this video, I'll be covering two methods of magnetizing. The first method, as you can see right here, is just straight up freeballing it and sticking some super glue on and hoping that the magnet will fit in properly. As you can see, this is giving me a little bit of trouble, as the magnet will either go in too far or not enough. And it's quite hard to toe that line and get it to stay perfectly in there while the super glue sets. Here, I think I finally gotten it to sit in place, but very quickly realized that I was very mistaken. After realizing that the magnet wasn't a tight enough fit to hold in place while the super glue dried, I realized that I'd have to resort to some other methods. So as you can see here, in the moment, I decided the best alternative was to lay some unused drill bits sideways to keep the magnet nice and flush with the top while the super glue sets. For obvious reasons, you can see that this is not my favorite method for magnetizing parts, as it's a little bit too random. It's not the most secure method, and as you can see, it's quite fiddly. So I've done it in this case as a demonstration, but as you'll see later, my recommended method is quite a lot less hassle and gives a better result in my opinion. Now that the leg magnets are in place, I decided to go through and bore out the holes that I'd pre-drilled earlier with the 1mm drill bit for the heads to go in. As I'll be placing a 2mm magnet here, I just came along with a 2mm magnet in my Tamiya pin vise and drilled out the remaining holes. Now onto the heads. Following my pattern from earlier, I'm going to first drill the heads with a 1mm drill bit. This is just as the little nubs for the heads are quite fine, meaning if I was to be a little bit off with my 2mm drill bit, I could potentially be very askew, and I didn't like that. So I'm going to first drill it with a smaller drill bit that I have a little bit more control on, and then later I'm going to go through with a 2mm drill bit just to get it to the right size. Unfortunately, it's out of focus here, but you'll be able to see them once I place them back down. Don't stab yourself. As the magnets we'll be placing are only 2mm in depth, you don't have to drill too far in, but I've got a little bit of room here to play with, so I roughly drilled about 3 to 4 mils through, just to give myself a little bit of wiggle room. But if you were so inclined, you could mask off the depth that you wanted to drill to on your drill bit with a piece of masking tape. Then you'd be able to ensure that each time you drilled in, you only drilled to the specific depth you wanted. However, I found that this is a little bit unnecessary, and as long as I've got enough depth there isn't too much worry in over drilling. As long as I don't drill through to the other side, but as I've said, the heads have a little bit of play here. That will be a slight issue once I magnetize the weapons, so I will need to be aware of that, but for here, we don't need to be as precise. Now that the super glue is set, I can safely remove the drill bits that were holding the magnets in place, and they'll be quite secure now. I found that the Gorilla Gel super glue that I use is quite tough, and I've been very happy with how securely it holds the magnets in place. But of course, as it dries hard, it will leave a little bit if you've pulled it over the top, so I'm just going to quickly clean those bits off. Now, if in handling you go a little bit wild with the super glue and your magnets get stuck together, don't worry, you can always use some sprue cutters to just separate them apart. As you can see here, a very quick way for me to get the correct orientation of the magnets is to just stick them on the base that they're going to be attached to. This will ensure that they're in the correct orientation that we want, and the two halves will actually stick together. Now, we are finally at the stage where I can go through my preferred method for securing magnets, into cavernous spaces, such as hollow insides, is using some Cellies Needed. It doesn't have to be this specific brand, but any kind of moldable epoxy resin I found is the best to work with. I say moldable because I don't want to have to mix up liquid epoxy resin every single time. And modeling compounds such as green stuff tend to be a little bit overpriced in my opinion. So I wanted something that I could mold and glue into something that wasn't too expensive either. You can find most kneadable epoxy resin at your local hardware store. I got this from Bunnings, and it comes in a long tube that you can just cut off the section that you require. For these models, I don't need much, so I just cut off a little puck at the end. As you might see at the end, this was a little bit of overkill, and I didn't end up needing this much anyway. So this epoxy resin will come in two parts with a darker colored core and a lighter colored outside. I just followed the instructions and knead together until it forms a uniform grey color. I've recently familiarized myself with some of the safety handling procedures of epoxy resin and learnt that I should probably be wearing gloves while I do this. So in this video, you'll see me attempt at using gloves to knead it together, but these gloves weren't the best for this. I am getting some nitrile gloves, so it should be much easier, but I kind of gave up with this method and just took the gloves off and condemned myself to having to wash my hands afterwards. Once I've got the epoxy resin kneaded together, you can just roll it up into a little tube and mash it through the opening that you drilled earlier. I'll use a drill bit to kind of just poke it through until it all gets in there, but you could use whatever you have at hand. As long as you don't mind getting a bit of epoxy resin on it, it's fine. Once I'm satisfied that I have enough resin inside the model, time to break out the magnet. And as you can see here, I'm not using any super glue because the adhesive properties of the epoxy resin will be enough to hold the magnet in place. So we should just be able to place it in there, and due to the epoxy resin kind of filling out the space, it will be a much tighter fit than before, but I prefer this as it allows me to be a little bit more precise. Generally, I'll use something flat and preferably non-ferrous, such as the end of a scraper, to kind of push the magnet in place until it's flush with the base. I say non-ferrous and immediately use a drill bit. But later on, I'll use non-ferrous things as there is a slight risk of the magnet sticking to it and moving about when you don't want it to. But here you can see I just push it in place until it's level and scrape out some of the residue that's in there. And rinse and repeat 3 more times. Now that we've placed the larger body magnet in place, and the inside of the model is already filled with resin, we don't have to worry too much about our head magnets going through into nothing and just falling straight through. But as they're a little bit smaller, I like to add a little bit of super glue as well, just for the added security, as they're so small and I haven't jammed the epoxy resin in through this hole. So it's kind of getting a more second-hand effect there. Again, to make things easier, I place the magnet at the end of a drill bit and use that to press it in place. I find that if you try and do it by hand, the magnet can easily get disorientated and face the wrong way, and then you'll wait for the glue to set and come back and they'll repel each other, and all your hard work will be for naught and you'll have to redo it. You won't need much super glue, but just enough to hold it in place. and I find this bit to generally be quite easy. As you'll see, I'm taking magnets from a stack of magnets that I've already orientated in the right direction. A handy tip to making sure they stay in the right orientation is sticking them to something else. And that way, if you take a magnet off the top, you know it'll always be facing in the right direction and you're not having to retest it each time. Of course, now my hands are covered in epoxy resin, I should probably go wash them. And I will be much safer with my epoxy safety moving forward, but this is a do as I say, not as I do. Towards removing some more parts, we'll need the little antennas to go on the heads, and we'll just go through and remove all those and clean them up. Personally, one of the fun things I enjoy about working with magnets is I can do funny things like this and make little chicken men by placing the head magnets on the bodies, and they'll just sit there. I don't know if it makes it much more efficient, but it's funny to me, and they stick in place, so I don't mind it. Now you might be wondering why I'm going to the trouble of magnetizing the heads and body, as most people will stop at just magnetizing the weapon options. However, I find that you can get a huge amount of customization purely from a movable head and torso. As you might be able to see in the end, by changing the direction the head is facing, or by twisting the body slightly, you can get drastically different poses for not that much added effort. And in my mind, the added benefit of having this cool little bit of posability is very much worth it in my eyes. A lot of people may disagree and only want to magnetize the weapon options so they can WYSIWYG their way. But personally, I'm not too bothered by WYSIWYG, and I just like magnets. I think they're cool. So I figured, why not? Add a little bit of customization to my army and make it fun for me along the way. And to add to that, it's extra fun when my models get destroyed. I can go, oh no, and just pull them apart like they've actually been destroyed. And there's nothing cooler than all of your models being tabled, but you get to make fun explosion noises and pull them apart when they do. So that brings a slight bit of joy to me as well. Like, these guys have been charged round one before and been absolutely tabled, and then I just get to pull them apart, and then they look like they've probably been destroyed. And I'm never too concerned about, realism in my war games, but I think it's fun to do stuff like that and have a little bit of thematic fun in between the competitive sweat. Now, this might be a personal beef that I have, but I am sick of seeing all the people on YouTube saying that they found this really cool and easy idea to magnetize the bases of all their models. And every single time I click on the video, it involves people breaking out the green stuff, putting a dab of green stuff, sticking a magnet to it, and making sure that it's level. And I just look at that and go, that is not easy. This is not the easiest method. Surely there's a better way. We can't have to break out the modeling clay every single time I want to stick a magnet to my base. That's expensive, and sure, there must be a better way. And browsing through Reddit, of course, I did find a better way. Someone said, just buy some 3mm magnets and they'll be the perfect height for any base. And so I did. Of course, I bought 5mm by 3mm magnets. It's really the 3mm height that matters, but I find 5mm to be a size that's easier to work with. But all you need to do is just super glue them straight to the base. No worrying about green stuff. Just stick them right on there. and they will be the perfect height. They won't be a high spot, so they won't catch on anything because you're moving your models about. They'll be low profile, but they'll just be perfect size to stick to any magnetic base you have for transport. So my models don't go flying around in the car when I'm driving. As you can see here, here's a model that I've already magnetized the base of, and he sits perfect there. There's no gap in between the bottom, he sits quite flush, but still glues on strong enough for me to go full 360 with him, and he slides around the table easy as. So yeah, in my mind, there's no reason to do anything other than just finding some 3mm magnets of your choice, some 3mm thick magnets of your choice, and just stick them to all your bases. I've done this with my crisis suits, I've done this with my smaller stealth suits without any issue. On some of the larger models, I'll add 2 or 3 magnets, just so they have something extra secure to stick on, but that's just personal preference. I also do this because my transport bases are some magnetic sheeting, which is just a stick-on magnetic sheet, which isn't quite as strong as metal or tin, so I prefer having the extra security.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
Now this isn't what you want to see. After waiting for all the glue to dry and test fitting the models up, I went to place it on and it did not go on. So the magnet must have gotten turned around as I was trying to place it in, but it is definitely facing the wrong direction. As I've already placed the head magnet in place, I can't just stick a pin through the other end and bash it out with a hammer like I have done before, so I'll have to try and dig it out. You'll see me try to no avail of trying to scrape it out with a scalpel, but that didn't quite work. So I decided that it would be better to drill out the sides of the magnet so that I could pry it out. So what I've done is get a 1.5mm drill bit, and it's a little bit too small to put in my cordless drill here, but the perfect size for me to put in my Tamiya pin vise. So I'm going to slide that right out and put it into the Tamiya pin vise, and we're going to put a drill hole either side of the magnet so I can try and pry that magnet out. And luckily I'm able to do this without damaging the exterior of the model at all, so you won't even notice that this was the case. Nothing is unsalvageable. If you make a mistake or do something wrong, you can always fix it. Now that I've drilled out one side, I'm just going to try and use a cheap drill bit to pry it open because I don't much care if this drill bit breaks. And it wasn't quite enough, so I'm going to drill another hole on the other side just so I can kind of pry it back and forth. And there we go, the magnet's free. So now all I need to do is place a little bit of super glue in, make sure the magnet's orientated in the right direction this time. As you can see, I'm not going to take any chances, and I'm going to test fit it first, just to make sure that I've got it the right way. I was not expecting this. I'm going to swirl the super glue around to make sure I have a nice even coverage. Then placing the magnet on top of the base, I'm just going to sit it right on there to ensure it's in the correct direction. Now I'll use the end of my model scraper just to push it in so it's flush. Moving on to building my models again, you can see here that's where GW recommends you affix the jetpacks. With them being a little bit lower down, the intake for the jetpacks are actually straight in line with the shoulder pads. And being a bit of a design nerd, I don't like this very much. It doesn't look right for an air inlet to be right in line with something blocking it. And I saw a post where someone else moved theirs up, and so I decided to give it a shot. and place my jetpacks a little bit higher up, just so the inlets clear the shoulder. And in my opinion, it gives these old models a little bit of a fresher look, makes them look a little bit more modern, and I prefer it. I'll also angle them down a little bit so the vents kind of pointing a little bit more vertical. And this is just a personal preference on my end. So now you might be wondering, Scuffed, why aren't you pre-drilling those holes? What have you said this entire time? Well, I found that with drilling the arms, that the spacing here is so tight that you'll fit two 2mm drill holes right next to each other, just in that little pocket there that the model naturally has, and that will be the perfect size for two 2mm magnets. So there isn't much need for me to pre-drill the holes here, as I've got the model itself kind of guiding the drill bit in place. Something that you will need to be cautious with drilling the hands out is not to over drill. I've personally almost drilled entirely through these hands before, getting a little bit too overzealous with my hand drill. So just be aware of how far you're drilling in. In hindsight, I probably could have marked out the depth that I wanted to go to on the drill with a bit of masking tape or electrical tape, but my hubris got the best of me, so I figured I could just eyeball it. Now that I've got the holes drilled, I'm going to do something very important here. I'm going to take 2 stacks of magnets and I'm going to sit them on a weapon that I've already done up earlier. If this is your first one, you can always just do it from scratch, but try and make sure that the stack of magnets is orientated in the same direction each time. To do this, I would place them on the side of a piece of metal or something that's facing in a specific direction so that you'd know which stack is which. The idea behind this is that I want all of my weapons for my tower to be able to interchange with all of the other weapons I have. There's no point in me taking all this effort to magnetize them if the second I go to put another weapon on there, it doesn't fit because the polarities are switched. So this is why I'm kind of using this other weapon here as a guide to make sure that the magnets are facing in the correct direction. And I'm just kind of jamming them in together and bending the stack off until a magnet sits in place. Once I've got a magnet or two in place, I say magnet or two because I was a little bit zealous here with my drilling and there's room for a little bit extra. I'll just go through and push them in until they're flush and cover that up nicely. I'm repeating this with all of the arms so that each arm can have its own weapon option. Now, while technically one magnet might suffice in holding the weapon in place, I like the idea of having 2 magnets, as this will ensure that the weapon always faces the correct direction, and I won't have weapons that are floppy, sagging, or aren't facing the right way, because having 2 magnets right next to each other, the weapon has to be orientated in the correct direction or the polarity won't work, because having 2 magnets next to each other, the polarity of them is kind of facing in the opposite direction if you were to take them separately and try and put them on top of each other. So this ensures that all weapons will face the correct direction. Now I've got all of the magnets in place on the arms, it's time to stick the arms onto the models. Here, this is just personal preference for how I want them to be posed. And we'll stick on the shoulder pads too while I'm at it. Now, I have a slight personal grievance here with the GW Crisis Suit models, because I find that the shoulder pads can interfere with the jetpacks and really limit the range of motion in where you're placing the shoulder pads or how you have the arms orientated. Here you can see that the shoulder pad won't quite fit on with the direction I had the arm in, so I've had to yank it off and add a little bit of extra acetone so it can be refitted in place. A little bit later on in the channel, you might see me have a go at printing up some proxies by Piper Makes and Neoteric Miniatures, and they have some really cool proxies of crisis suits. So I'm really interested in giving them a shot and seeing how they compare to the GW sculpts. Maybe this is just a common issue with all crisis suit variants, but I'll be really interested to see what a third party does with this and if I find the same issues. Now time for the final step is cutting out all of the weapons. This group of crisis suits will be some fire knife crisis suits, meaning they can be ran with either some missile pods or plasma rifles. However, I find plasma rifles to be a little bit more aesthetically pleasing than the missile pods, even though on tabletop I will almost always take the missile pods, as in my opinion, with the plasma rifles, you're kind of just getting a shittier version of melters, and if I wanted to have a melter, I would just take a melter and be able to deal d6 damage. I get you are getting slightly longer range with the plasma rifles, but if I'm going to go that far and only get one shot, I'd prefer to go all the way and take some Sunforge battlesuits to get the full fusion blasters. Now to put these magnets in place, I will have to cut off some of the nubs that GW's put on there so that the weapons will fit in place. And in this case, I'm only cutting off the side that I'll be placing the magnets on. Now I do have to do a little bit of a test fit here, as again, for GW spec, as per the instructions, I won't actually be able to fit the weapons in place as intended, as they are blocked by the shoulder pads that I put on. So instead of placing the magnets up front, I'm going to place the magnets a little bit further to the rear, just so I have enough clearance for the shoulder pads as well. Here I'm going to eyeball it and just drill two holes that are generally next to each other. They won't need to be as close as the ones on the arms, as the polarity of the magnets will still orientate the weapons in the correct position, and they will hold on even though they're not as tight as the arms. So even though there's a little bit of space, extra spacing here that you won't see on the arms, this isn't an issue at all, and they'll still stick on there. So as it provides no different to the end result, I'm just going to speed things up and just drill the holes rather than being too particular about things. Due to the extra spacing, however, I won't be able to do my little trick from earlier and just jam the magnets in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place 2 stacks of magnets on the arms of the crisis suit to orientate the direction they'll be going on, and I'll just remove one of the stacks. In this case, I'll remove the front stack first and glue the rear magnets in place, and once I've done that, I'll just switch it around and do the inverse. Now I found with gluing these small magnets in place, it's a little bit easier if rather than trying to squeeze on the correct amount of superglue each time, I just make a little dab of superglue on my table, and then I can periodically move my magnets across and just dab them in, rather than having the fine motor control of trying to get the perfect amount of superglue on the tip of each magnet every single time. I can just dab it in there, and it's a lot easier in my opinion, especially considering that the superglue won't dry immediately either with the Gorilla brand superglue that I'm using. So it's quite fine just to sit there for a couple of minutes while I'm placing the magnets. In the end, I've got 3 crisis suits with movable heads, movable torsos, and interchangeable weapons. So if a couple of days in the future, hopefully, GW releases their balanced data slate or any rules erratas that change which weapons I want to be taking, I can always switch them out and I'm not 100% set into whatever my glue's got. Also, I paid for the whole box of crisis suits. I'm going to use the whole box of crisis suits. If I want to run these guys as flamers, or I want to run these guys as fusion blasters or plasma rifles, I want to be able to switch that up as I please. I don't want to be set in to just running flamers or having to buy an extra box. Personally, I'm not too worried by WYSIWYG. What you see what is what you get, but I know some people like it, and if I've paid for all the weapon options, I might as well use them. Otherwise, all I'm left with is a box full of bits of old weapons that I don't end up using, and what's the point in that? Instead, I get to customize things and move them about. And something I like about standardizing them too is I can always just switch the bodies around if I don't like the way that it's posing, as I haven't drilled these holes 100% accurately, so the certain addition of one top with another might result in a little bit too much lean for my liking, so switching them around, I can generally find the pose that I want. So there you go, a nice happy family of crisis suits. And I figured I'd include a little bit of B-reel at the end for my slightly clickbaited title. So hopefully you enjoyed that. I wasn't originally planning on doing a magnetization video this week, but one of my other projects has taken a little bit longer than I originally planned. So while I'm finishing up the design on that, I figured I'd give you a crisis suits video to tide you over for the meantime. But if you'd like to see any updates on the current project I'm working on, check out our Discord in the bio. I post regular updates, so you'll be able to see what I'm working on, and we've got a nice little community in there as well. But that's it for now. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next week, Hammer. Bye. Wait, you might be saying, what do you mean this is the end of the video? Isn't he gonna paint them as well? Well, my paints, I ate them. So you'll have to wait for another video to see that.